Good evening and welcome to the final budget presentation for the 2026-2027 school year. Today we'll go through the budget calendar and timeline, local, state, and federal revenue sources, expenditures, the tax impact and long-term projections, and finish off with final comment. This slide outlines the Act 1 timeline, which governs how and when school districts develop and adopt their budgets. The process begins at the end of December when districts are required to mail homestead and farmstead applications. By January 29, 2026, the district was required to either adopt a resolution not to exceed the Act 1 index or to submit a preliminary budget to PDE. On March 1st, 2026 was the deadline for homeowners to file those applications with the county. The county then notified the district by May 1st of all approved homesteads and farmsteads, and PDE provides the amount of property tax relief funding. Finally, the state requires the proposed final budget to be approved by May 31st, with the final budget adopted by June 30th. This is our internal budget calendar and how we work through the process as a district. In September, PDE notifies us of the Act 1 index. For this year, that was 3.5%, which becomes a key parameter as we build the budget. Beginning in November and continuing through the winter months, we provided regular updates, reviewed assumptions, and refined projections as we work closely with the building and department leaders to gather budget input. In January, the board took formal action to adopt a resolution committing to stay within that 3.5% index. This is an important step as it sets clear expectation for taxpayers and guides the remainder of the budget process. On April 21st, the proposed final budget was reviewed at the Finance Committee meeting and it was brought to a vote. Tonight, we're presenting the final budget with the final adoption date to be May 20th. Our goal is to adopt the final budget in May, which gives us time to prepare tax bills and get them to the tax collectors and mail them out by the July 1st deadline. The final budget summary has been updated since last month's presentation. Overall, revenues came in slightly lower than projected in April, which is due to the property tax relief funding being less than last year's amount, which was a placeholder. On the expenditure side, we also made a few adjustments under salary and benefits, insurance costs, and library contributions. As a result, total revenues are projected at $63,823,762 and expenses at $64,004,171. This brings the budget shortfall now to $180,409, which is an improvement from last month. This final budget includes a 3.5% tax increase, resulting in a millage rate of 22.8469. Here we have a 9-year trend of our final budget. One key takeaway is that the revenue growth has slowed. For the 26-27 budget year, revenues increased by 2.55%, which is consistent with last year's 2.6% increase, but is definitely below the 4 to 5% increases we saw in prior years. In response to the decrease, we made an effort this year to better align expenditures with revenues. As a result, expenditures increased by only 1.58% compared to the 3 to 4% increases in previous years. It has been important to note that the district has budgeted for a shortfall in each of the past 9 years. However, we have not hit those shortfalls. In addition, the district maintains a healthy fund balance, which provides flexibility to address any potential shortfalls if necessary. For the 2026-2027 budget, approximately 82.26% of our revenue comes from local sources, 16.93% from state sources, and just 0.81% from federal sources. As you can see, the district relies heavily on local revenue with minimal funding coming from federal level. This spreadsheet, which I previously shared at the February board meeting, is critical to understand the decline in our revenue growth. In the 2025-2026 budget, we experienced a decrease in assessed value over $13 million, or approximately 0.66% decrease. This reduction directly impacted our tax base and contributed to a lower than expected revenue increase. For the 26-27 budget, we're projecting a small increase in assessed value of just over $10 million, or about 0.51%. However, it is important to note that even with this increase, our total budgeted assessed value has not yet returned to the 24-25 level. This net loss is assessed value over time has a compounding effect, reducing the district's tax base and resulting in higher than anticipated tax increases than originally projected a few years back. This slide has been updated since last month to reflect the revised property tax relief funding. It illustrates how real estate tax revenue is calculated using 4 key components: budgeted assessed value, millage rate, property tax relief funding, and the collection rate. Based on the millage rate of 22.8469, we anticipate generating approximately $42,993,000 $141 in real estate tax revenue. The key highlights of local revenue sources show that real estate taxes remain the district's primary revenue driver, representing over 67% of the total revenue budget. Earned income taxes account for approximately 8.5%, which is the second biggest contributor. Since last month, the real estate revenue line has increased slightly due to the reduction in projected property tax relief funding. With lower funding levels, fewer credits are available to offset real estate tax bills. The payment in lieu of taxes revenue has decreased as the related agreement has been finalized and interest rates are projected to decline over the next school year, resulting in a decrease. Athletic admissions are now being accounted for in the general fund, where in prior years it was in the athletic fund. And tuition revenue will phase out over time as the district no longer accepts tuition students. Once the remaining grandfather students graduate, this revenue source will drop to zero. On May 1st, we received the final number of approved homestead and farmstead applications from the county, totaling 3,599 properties. We are required to distribute the $1,184,128 in property tax relief funding across those approved properties. For the 2026-2027 budget year, each approved taxpayer will receive a reduction of $329.02 on their school tax bill, which equates to $14,490 in assessed value. This bar graph shows the historical trend of earned income tax revenue. There were two atypical years during COVID period, 21-22 and 22-23 school year, which impacted collections. We saw a decline in the 23-24 school year, followed by a small increase in the most recent years. This report is presented monthly as EIT represents a significant portion of the district's local revenue base. Another way to view the history of EIT is through year-over-year percentage change. As shown, the annual percent change is highly variable and inconsistent. The primary reason for this is that EIT is based on eligible wages earned within the community, which can fluctuate significantly from year to year. In our district, this is further impacted by relatively small number of high-income earners, including individuals receiving bonuses, severance payments, or other one-time compensation events, which can significantly distort annual results. For the 2025-2026 budget, revenues were more closely aligned with actual collections, reflecting improved forecasting. Going forward, we're taking a more conservative approach to budgeting EIT, recognizing that this is one of the more unpredictable local revenue sources. State revenues are projected conservatively as state budget has not been passed. For the 25-26 school year, the budget was not approved until November. While there is expectation that the 26-27 state budget may be passed earlier due to the governor election, I do not anticipate approval prior to July 1st. For planning purposes, I have used the governor's proposed budget figures to estimate basic ed funding, special education funding, and ready-to-learn block grant amounts. Property tax relief funding has already been finalized and therefore is set. The remaining state revenue categories are primarily reimbursement-based and have been projected using historical averages. A significant portion of state funding is calculated using aid ratios. This slide provides a snapshot of school districts in Allegheny County and their respective market value personal income aid ratios. As shown, our district has one of the lowest aid ratios in the county. Under the Act 1 index framework, the base index is 3.5%. Districts with a market value personal income aid ratio of 40% or higher receive an adjusted index that allows them to increase taxes above the base rate. The higher the aid ratio, the higher the adjusted index a district is permitted to use. Because of Quaker Valley's relative low aid ratio, we are limited to the base Act 1 index. This slide outlines our federal funding. Overall, this is a small increase from prior year, primarily driven by the Access program. While Access funding has increased, we have been closely monitoring and feel comfortable projecting approximately $220,000 for next year based on current participation trends and program requirements. Overall, federal revenue represents a very small portion of the budget, approximately 0.81% of total revenues, so the district is not heavily reliant on federal funding. This slide brings together the key drivers behind our revenue outlook and helps explain the overall slowdown in revenue growth over the past two budget cycles. First, we're coming out of a period where the district regularly saw annual revenue increases of more than 4%. Over the last two budget years, that trend has shifted, and we are now seeing slower growth, in some areas even decline. A major factor is the change in our assessed value. In 25-26, we experienced a decline of over $13 million. That reduction is important because it doesn't just affect one year. It carries forward and continues to impact future budgets. While we're projecting a slight increase for 26-27, our assessed value still has not returned to 24-25 levels. Since real estate revenue is driven directly by assessed value, this creates ongoing pressure on our largest revenue source. EIT is another area that is a challenge. Over the past decade, we've seen significant fluctuations year to year. While our 25-26 projections are more closely aligned with actual collections, we continue to budget this revenue conservatively. Finally, state funding remains uncertain at this point as the state budget has not been finalized. For planning purposes, we're using the governor's proposed budget estimates until final figures are approved. This pie chart shows the breakdown of our expenditures. Salaries and benefits make approximately 67% of the budget, while debt service accounts for about 10.44%. Combined, these two categories represent over 3/4 of the total expenses. This is our expenditure budget summary. Salaries are driven by contractual obligations, and our medical, dental, and vision benefits are provided through the consortium. Medical benefits were seeing an increase of 8.3%, and dental benefits have increased by 3.5%. Our substitute costs decreased due to renegotiating the service upcharge fee down to 33%. The debt service line shows an increase, but this is due to the district office lease and copier leases that are now being recorded in that category. GASB 87 requires leases to be reported under debt obligations. This change will also positively impact our PDE 363 calculation for cyber charter tuition, since debt service is deducted from the calculation. We are planning a $1.9 million transfer to our capital projects to support the district's 5-year capital plan. Our contribution to the Sewickley Public Library is budgeted at $570,000. Building level budgets are showing decreases because copier leases have now been moved to the debt service line. The high school budget, however, is reflecting a little bit of an increase due to athletic officials and event workers now being budgeted within that building. Instruction and learning is decreasing from the prior year because curriculum purchases are not as significant as they were in 25-26. This budget can fluctuate depending on curriculum review cycles and required purchases. Student Services is seeing a 1.6% increase along with a 2.19% increase in tuition costs for outside placements. Charter school costs were calculated using the new state formula and projected student enrollment based on current attendance trends. The technology department is showing a decrease because we conducted a thorough review of expenditures and evaluated operational needs carefully. Facilities and security budgets are increasing approximately 2.4% due to inflationary pressures, and utilities are also seeing a larger increase because energy costs continue to fluctuate. Transportation costs are increasing more than normal because the transportation contract was recently settled this year, and the budget now reflects the updated contractual rates. Lastly, the central and business office budget is decreasing to the district office lease being moved into the debt service line. The top 3 cost drivers that have been mandated by the state and that are underfunded are PSER pension payments, special ed costs, and charter school payments. PSER's pension contributions make up 13.42% of our total budget and have accounted for more than 25% of the district's tax increases since the 14-15 school year. Special educational costs represents 12.82% of the budget, while the state and federal funding only cover about 22% of those costs. Charter school costs also continue to impact the budget due to an outdated and inequitable funding formula. Although recent changes to the cyber and charter tuition calculation are expected to provide some savings for the district, the savings are still less than originally anticipated. The next 2 slides show the history of our PSERS costs. For the upcoming budget year, we're seeing a slight decline in costs. Each December, the PSERS board sets the employer contribution rate for the following fiscal year. For the 26-27 school year, that rate is 33.59%, meaning the district is required to contribute that percentage of eligible employee wages towards retirement costs. The second column shows the employer contribution rate set by PSERS board since the 2002-2003 school year, along with the district's annual costs in the fourth column. As you can see, the overall trend has been consistent increases over time, with a few years showing decreases. Even with only a slight reduction in the employer rate from 34% to 33.59%, the district is projecting an overall decrease in PSERS costs due to employee retirements and resignations. The district does receive approximately 50% reimbursement from the state for these costs, which is reflected in our state revenue line items. It also is important to note that future projected PSERS rates are expected to increase again. This bar graph clearly illustrates a growing gap between the district's special educational costs and the funding received from state and federal sources. Currently, the district receives special education funding from the state, access reimbursement through the federal government, and IDEA funding, which flows from the AIU and is recorded as local revenue. Even with combining all of these funding sources, they cover only a small portion of the actual costs the district incurs to provide legally required services to students. In PA, families have school choice options. If a student who resides in our district attends a cyber charter school or charter school, the district is required to pay the tuition costs. Those tuition rates are calculated based on the district's budget and average daily membership. 24-25, the state provided the district with approximately $32,000 in cyber charter funding, which covered about 4% of our costs. That was the first time since the 10-11 school year that the state provided any direct funding assistance for cyber charter expenses. For the 25-26 school year, the state revised the cyber charter tuition formula, which is expected to provide the district with some cost savings moving forward. However, this continues to be an underfunded mandate that creates financial challenges for many school districts across PA. Here's the recap of our expenses. Salary and benefits account for approximately 67% of the budget, with salary increases tied to contractual obligations and staffing that is needed to support student programs and operations. Another major factor impacting the budget is continued growth of underfunded mandates from the state, particularly in the areas of special education and charter school tuition. These costs continue to rise faster than the funding provided, placing additional pressure on our local taxpayers. The district also continues to make planned investments in facilities and infrastructure. These projects are important to maintaining our buildings and supporting long-term operational needs. And lastly, the district has proactively accounted for the debt associated with the upcoming high school project within its long-term financial planning to ensure the project remains financially manageable moving forward. Quaker Valley continues to have one of the lower tax burdens in Allegheny County when compared to surrounding school districts. Even when adjusting for differences in property values through the equalized millage rate, Quaker Valley ranks among the districts with the lowest overall taxing effort. This chart is a comparison of Quaker Valley against the other Allegheny school districts. It also shows our equalized millage rate closely mirrors our actual millage rate, which is an important context point when comparing taxing efforts across districts. And this slide provides a comparison of millage rate history among our peer districts for the last 5 years. Those other districts include Fox Chapel, Hampton, Moon, Mount Lebanon, NA, Pine Richland, South Fayette, and Upper St. Clair. It shows where Quaker Valley currently falls in relation to these districts, and we remain on the lower end of the millage rate range. Each year, we try to provide a 5-year long-term plan, and it's important to note that these projections are based on what we know as of today, and it will be updated annually as conditions change. This includes potential impacts from state and federal elections, economic shifts, and other policy changes. It reflects costs associated with the new high school, ongoing capital needs, and maintaining our current level of programs and services. Overall, it shows how we're planning to fund the new high school while continuing to support our existing facilities and operations. In this 5-year expense projection, it's important to note that new CBAs will be negotiated, which will impact future salary and benefit costs. Benefit trends such as medical coverage and PSERS contributions are expected to continue to increase over the projection period. The debt service line includes both existing debt obligations and projected payments associated with the new high school project. All other expenditure categories reflect an anticipated inflationary increase in normal costs of escalation over time. It is important to note that decisions related to the current high school building and its future use may impact future operating costs. If both facilities are maintained, there would be an increased cost associated with buildings and grounds maintenance as well as utilities. For revenues, as noted in prior slides, we have experienced a slowdown in revenue growth over the past 2 years, and we anticipate these challenges in the near future. There have been discussions of a potential reassessment for Allegheny County, which could positively impact assessed values and real estate revenue. However, the timing and outcome of that process is still uncertain. Certain factors such as future interest rates and broader economic conditions cannot be accurately projected over a 5-year period. As a result, many of the revenue assumptions are based on historical averages and current trends. The ACT1 index is projected to remain relatively moderate over the next several years, which will continue to limit allowable tax increases and will be slowly monitored as part of the budget process. Lastly, this slide shows our long-term millage rate projections. Prior to the assessment in 2013, the average annual tax increase was approximately 2%. Over the past 12 years, the Quaker Valley School District's average annual increase has been about 2.2%. Looking forward, for the 5-year projection reflects an average annual increase of approximately 3.3%. This increase is driven by continued pressure from rising costs, including mandated expenses, and as well as overall inflationary impacts. It's important to note that these projections are based on current assumptions and conditions are used for planning purposes only. They will be reviewed and updated annually as new information becomes available. For the 26-27 final budget, a 3.5% tax increase is included, resulting in a millage rate of 22.8469. For a home with an assessed value of $200,000, this equals to an increase of approximately $12.87 per month in property taxes.